The room smelled like dust and sealed off grief. No windows. No light except the thin gray line beneath the locked door. No sound except the slow, broken breathing of the woman bound to a wheelchair in the far corner, the kind of breathing that told you a body was running out of time. Her name was Celestine Whitmore. She was 67 years old. A woman who had once run a house with a firm hand and a warm laugh. A woman who raised her son on sacrifice and prayer, who stretched every dollar until it nearly tore, who told him every single morning, without fail, that he was going to be somebody. Now she sat in the dark. Tied down by thick rope at her wrists, her chest, and her ankles. 3 days. No water. No food. No medication for the stroke that had stolen her voice and stilled her legs. 3 days, and not one door had opened. If you are finding this channel for the very first time, welcome, and we are so glad you are here. Subscribe, like, and tell us the beautiful city you're watching from. Stories like this one are exactly why this space exists. Stay close, because what unfolds next will reach straight into your chest and refuse to let go. Her lips had cracked so badly that dried blood had settled at the corners of her mouth. Her tongue felt like rough cloth. Her stomach had long stopped hurting, it had gone into a quiet that frightened her more than any pain could. Every breath was work now. Every blink was effort. The rope on her right wrist had worn a groove into her skin, and she could feel the tight grain of the knot pressed against her palm, deliberate, patient, tied by hands that had taken their time because they knew no one was coming. She had stopped fighting on the second day. She had stopped hoping somewhere around midnight on the third. She closed her eyes and listened to the silence of a house that had decided she no longer existed. Then, a sound. A small shuffle. The lightest drag of tiny feet moving carefully across the hallway floor. Too quiet for adult shoes. Too slow for anyone in a rush. The door eased open. A small hand appeared first, little brown fingers curling around the edge, pressing steadily inward. A 3-year-old boy squeezed himself through the narrow gap. He was holding an orange plastic bowl pressed against his chest with both hands, gripping it the way you grip something precious and irreplaceable. Inside the bowl, mashed rice. Still warm. His name was Omari. And this was not his first visit. He crossed the room without hesitating. Dragged his small wooden footstool across the floor. Climbed up onto it with shaking legs. Lifted the bowl toward Celestine's cracked lips with hands that trembled from the effort of holding something so carefully. "Eat," he whispered. "I bring food." Celestine looked at this child. This tiny, fearless child standing in the dark of a room where no one was supposed to exist. Something inside her chest cracked so wide open she felt it rise into her throat. She tried to scream. Not from fear. From a gratitude too enormous and too crushing to hold inside a body that could no longer move. But no sound came out. And what little Omari did not know, what no one in this house had been allowed to know, was that this room was never meant to be found. Omari came back. He came back the next morning. And the morning after. And the morning after that. He never missed a day. He carried whatever he could, rice, soft bread, crackers soaked in warm water, always in the orange bowl, always held against his chest with both hands like a small and serious offering. The first time he had found her, he had stood in the doorway for a long moment, head tilted, eyes wide. Then he had walked straight to her and touched her hand the way children touch something they do not fully understand but somehow know matters. "You sleeping sick?" he had asked. Celestine had moved her eyes. That was all she could do. He had taken it as yes. That was 6 days ago. Since then, Omari had made this room his quiet purpose. He did not tell his mother. He did not ask anyone for permission. 3-year-olds do not think about risk the way adults do. They see what is directly in front of them, and what was directly in front of Omari was a woman who needed food and received none. His mother, Kezia Monroe, was the live-in maid at the Whitmore estate. She had held that position for 2 years. She worked long hours in a large house, moved quietly through its rooms, and kept her head down because that was the only way she knew to stay safe and stay employed. She had Omari late in her life, alone, without much support, and she protected him the way people protect things they know they cannot afford to lose. Every morning she set his bowl on the small table by the kitchen window, kissed his forehead, and returned to her duties. She never noticed the bowl disappeared some mornings before she came back. Omari carried it carefully. Always both hands. Always slow steps so nothing spilled. When he reached Celestine, he would climb his stool and tip the bowl forward. She could not raise her hands. She could not lean in. But she could tilt her head, barely, and part her lips. And Omari fed her. One careful spoonful at a time. Patient as only the very young can be. Today, something changed. He wiped her chin gently with the hem of his shirt. Then his eyes traveled down to her arms. He noticed the ropes for the first time. His small forehead creased. His eyes narrowed. He looked at the rope, then back at her face, then back at the rope again. The look on his face was not confusion. It was something closer to recognition, the quiet, certain recognition of something that should not be there. He did not say anything. But that night, long after Omari had been tucked into his small cot in the maid's quarters, someone else in the mansion had noticed something too. Someone was watching. Talia Beaumont never walked into a room. She arrived. She was the kind of woman who filled a doorway before she even crossed it. Tall. Composed. Always dressed like she had somewhere more important to be. Her voice was soft and flat at the same time, the type of voice that delivers instructions without raising itself and expects them carried out before the sentence finishes. She had been Darius Whitmore's girlfriend for 3 years. She managed the estate. She managed the staff. She managed the finances that moved through Darius's accounts while he traveled and built his empire and trusted her entirely with everything left behind. The staff of the Whitmore estate feared her in the quiet way people fear things that smile at them. They had learned, each in their own time, that Talia's warmth was a costume she wore in public, and that the version of her that appeared when no cameras were rolling was a different woman entirely. That morning, Talia stood at the entrance to the west corridor and stared at the locked door at the far end of the hall. She stood there for a long moment without moving. Then she turned to the head of house and spoke plainly. "No one enters that wing," she said. "Not cleaners. Not kitchen staff. Not anyone. I want that understood by every person on this property." No one asked why. They never did. She had moved Celestine Whitmore into that room 11 days ago. She had told Darius, who was overseas and trusted her completely, that the primary suite was being renovated and that his mother had been moved to a more comfortable space with a private nurse on site. No nurse had ever arrived. What Talia had decided, with a cold and careful certainty, was that Celestine Whitmore was already a fading woman. The stroke had been severe. The doctors had not offered much hope. Talia had simply decided to assist the process, quietly, without mess, without anything that could be traced back to her directly. She did not think of it as cruelty. She thought of it as patience. But something had shifted in her calculation. Something she could not name but could feel at the back of her neck the way you feel a change in temperature before the weather turns. That afternoon, she used her key and stepped inside the West Wing room. She scanned the space. The walls. The floor. The still figure in the wheelchair. Her eyes stopped. The food bowl on the floor beside the chair, the room had no food, no one brought food, was empty. She stared at it. And then Talia smiled. But it was not relief that moved across her face. It was fear. Omari did not know what a secret was. He only knew that the woman in the chair needed him to come back. So he came back. Same bowl. Same careful walk. Same 2 hands gripping the rim so nothing spilled. He had started talking to her more now. Not always full words, the way 3-year-olds speak, where thoughts outrun language. But Celestine tracked him with her eyes. She tilted her head when he spoke. And once, on a Tuesday morning, the corner of her mouth had moved, just barely, just enough to count as a smile. Omari had laughed out loud at that. Then he remembered where he was and pressed his finger to his lips. "Shoo," he whispered, very seriously. "We quiet." Today, he had come with a decision already made. He had looked at those ropes on every visit for 2 days now. And they bothered him in a direct, simple way things bother small children who have not yet learned to look past the things that are wrong. The ropes looked like something that should not be on a person. He reached up and grabbed the knot at her right wrist with both hands. He pulled. It did not move. He repositioned his fingers. Stuck his tongue out in full concentration. Pulled again. The rope was thick and old and tied by someone who understood knots well. For a 3-year-old with small hands and no real leverage, it was like trying to move something that had no intention of moving. But Omari kept trying. Down the hall, Kezia Monroe was folding clean linens when the thought moved through her without warning. That sudden hollow feeling, the kind that arrives before the reason does. She set the sheet down slowly. She had not seen Omari in over an hour. An hour of silence from a 3-year-old was never an innocent thing. She checked the kitchen. The back garden. The room he sometimes napped in. Then she turned and looked down the corridor toward the west wing, and saw it. Small footprints disturbing the thin layer of dust on the floor tiles. Leading directly toward the door at the far end. Her heart dropped. She began walking. Then faster. And then, from somewhere above, from the staircase landing, she heard it. Talia Beaumont's heels. Coming down the stairs. Moving toward the west wing. The door handle of the room at the end of the corridor began to turn. Omari heard it too. He froze. Both hands still on the rope at Celestine's wrist. His eyes shot to the door. Then back to her face. Celestine's eyes went wide. She moved them fast, left, then right, then down at the floor. The way a person moves their eyes when they have nothing left to speak with except the whites and the dark, and they need someone to understand immediately. Omari understood. He grabbed his footstool. Dragged it fast and low across the floor. Pushed himself under the heavy wooden table in the corner and pulled his knees tight against his chest. He held his bowl against his stomach. He stopped breathing. The door opened. Talia Beaumont stepped into the room. Burgundy dress. Hair pulled back. A scent that did not belong in a dark and airless space like this one. She stood still for a moment after she entered, adjusting her eyes to the low light, adjusting her face to whatever was about to be in front of her. Then she moved toward the wheelchair. Celestine kept her face flat. Every muscle that still responded, she forced still. Eyes forward. Breathing shallow and even. She gave Talia nothing. Talia circled the chair slowly. She stopped behind it. Put one hand on the handle. Scanned the room. The floor. The corners. The walls. The table. Then her eyes returned to the wheelchair. To the rope on Celestine's right wrist. She leaned in closer. The knot that Omari had been working on for 20 minutes, it was not undone. But it was different. Disturbed. The end of the knot had been pushed and pulled in the wrong direction, the fibers slightly splayed where small fingers had worked at them. Talia straightened up. Her jaw tightened. She turned and scanned the room again. Slowly this time. Deliberately. Like she was accounting for every shadow, every corner, every place a thing could hide. She took 2 steps toward the door. Then she stopped. And she spoke, not loud, not angry, just a flat and steady voice directed at the still air of the room. Someone has been feeding you. Under the table, Omari pressed the bowl so hard against his stomach that the plastic bent inward. Celestine did not flinch. Talia stepped out of the room. The door clicked shut. And then the footsteps stopped. Right outside the door. She had not walked away. She was standing directly on the other side of that door. Listening. The footsteps eventually moved away. Omari waited. He counted the way his mother had taught him, 1, 2, 3, 4, until the sound faded completely down the hall. Then he waited longer, because he was 3 years old and he was frightened and he was not sure the frightened part was finished. Finally, he crawled out from under the table. His knees were dusty. His hands were shaking. He looked at Celestine and found she was crying, not dramatically, not loudly, just tears moving steadily down her face as if they had been waiting for permission. He walked to her and pressed his thumb gently against her cheek. "Don't cry," he said quietly. "I'm sorry I was slow." He set the bowl down and pulled out the small plastic cup he had tucked into his waistband. Water this time. The kind he drank from at lunch. He held it to her lips with both hands and tilted it slowly, watching her face to make sure he was not going too fast. She drank. She closed her eyes while she drank. The expression on her face was the kind of thing that should never have to exist in a room as dark and small as this one. When she opened her eyes again, Omari was already back at the rope. He worked the knot with both hands, fingers pressing in, finding the loose section from before and pulling the end through carefully. The way you ease a thread free from a knot when pulling too hard will only make it tighter. He felt something shift. He repositioned. Pulled again. His small tongue appeared at the corner of his mouth, and his whole face went sharp with focus. He pulled once more. And it gave. The rope fell from Celestine's right wrist and landed on the floor with a soft and quiet sound. Omari stared at it. Then he looked up at her. His face was serious and proud and slightly breathless, the face of someone who had done something real. He reached immediately for the next knot. The room held nothing but the sound of his small effort and the soft, grateful sound of her exhale. He did not hear the door. He did not hear the footsteps. He did not know anyone was behind him until the door burst open. Kezia Monroe stood in the doorway and did not move. She had spent the last 4 minutes searching every corner of the West Wing hallway. She had expected to find her son standing somewhere he should not be. She had been prepared to grab him quietly and disappear before anyone noticed. She was not prepared for this. Her eyes moved through the room in one long sweep. Her son, kneeling on the floor, arms stretched upward toward the wheelchair. The rope still binding the woman at her chest and ankles. One rope already on the floor. The orange bowl by the table. The cracked lips. The rope marks. The hollow face streaked with dried tears. The state of a woman who had been left here to disappear. Kezia's hand came up slowly to her mouth. She knew this face. She had seen it once before, in the large gold-framed photograph on the main staircase landing. The one Talia had never removed but had turned slightly inward toward the wall so it caught no one's attention directly. The one Kezia had always glanced at while cleaning, always slightly curious. Celestine Whitmore. The billionaire's mother. The woman Kezia had been told was resting comfortably in a private care facility while the estate underwent its renovations. The woman who was sitting right here. Tied to a chair in a storage room at the back of the house where no one was supposed to walk. Kezia's legs went unsteady. She grabbed the doorframe hard. Omari looked up. "Mama," he said simply. "I helping." Those 2 words landed in Kezia's chest like a stone dropped into deep water. She felt them spread. She crossed the room. She knelt beside her son and looked at Celestine up close, really looked, and what she saw made her stomach turn completely over. She placed her hands over Omari's small fingers on the second rope. Together, they worked the knot. Celestine's lips were moving. Slowly. With great effort, the way someone moves a muscle that has been unused for a long time. Her mouth opened and closed. Something was forming there, a sound, a word, something she had been holding and waiting for the moment to release. She whispered one name. Not Omari's name. Not Kezia's. A name only someone who had truly known Darius Whitmore, who had rocked him as an infant and held his face in her hands and prayed over every year of his life, could know. Kezia stared at her. And then, from the upper hallway, from somewhere near the top of the main staircase, Talia screamed. The scream brought everyone. The head of house arrived first, then 2 kitchen staff, then the security guard from the main gate. They moved fast through the corridors toward the sound, and when they pressed past Talia standing rigid at the top of the West Wing stairs, they did not stop. They kept moving until they reached the open door at the end of the hall. They stopped. Every one of them stopped. Kezia looked up. Omari sat beside her on the floor, still holding his orange bowl, watching the adults fill the doorway with expressions he could not read. One of the kitchen women pressed her hand flat against her chest. "Lord," she said. Quietly. Like a prayer. The security guard turned and walked quickly back down the hallway with his phone already out. He did not ask anyone's permission. Talia appeared in the doorway behind the staff. "This is not what it," she started. Odalise, the head of house, a woman who had managed the estate for 4 years and followed every instruction given to her, looked at Talia. She did not raise her voice. She did not move from where she stood. She simply looked at her with the full weight of everything she had been told not to question and everything she understood now. Then she turned back toward Celestine. "We're getting her out," Odalise said. Talia's voice climbed. "You do not make decisions in this house. I am the one who." "Not today," Odalise said. The staff moved. Blankets were found. Water was brought. 2 of them worked carefully at the remaining ropes while Celestine trembled and let them come near her. Omari did not leave her side. He held her freed hand, the one with the rope mark still pressed into the skin, and gripped it with both of his and did not let go for any reason. The billionaire, Darius Whitmore, was 37,000 feet above the Atlantic when the first call came through his satellite phone. Then a second. Then a third. He landed in California 6 hours later. He drove directly to the estate. He walked through the front door without calling ahead. Talia was already in the parlor. Sitting with her hands folded on her knees and an expression arranged carefully on her face, steady, reasonable, prepared. Darius looked at her. He raised his hand. The entire room went completely still. He did not strike her. He held his arm up and pointed at the door. One slow, deliberate point toward the exit. His arm was shaking. His jaw was locked. He was a man holding himself at the very edges, and the effort of it was written across his entire face. "Get out," Darius Whitmore said. Talia opened her mouth. "Get out." 2 officers from the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department were already positioned in the driveway when Talia walked through the front door. They had arrived 20 minutes before Darius's car. They had a preliminary report. A full medical assessment from the paramedics who had transported Celestine. Statements from 6 staff members who had not waited to be asked. The evidence was complete. The ropes. The starvation. The deliberate dismissal of nurses. The locked wing. The 11 days of calculated absence. Talia Beaumont was escorted from the Whitmore estate in handcuffs at 4:47 in the afternoon. She did not go quietly. She spoke steadily the entire walk to the patrol vehicle, calm and measured, performing composure for the cameras she understood were already recording. But no one listened. Not the officers. Not the staff who stood in the driveway in a row, watching. Not Darius, who stood in the open doorway with one hand braced against the frame and his head bent forward. At the hospital, Celestine lay in a room with an 4 in her arm and a blanket pulled to her chin. She was alert. Her eyes tracked. The attending physician told Darius she was severely dehydrated and malnourished, but alive. He said that another 24 hours in that room may have produced a different outcome entirely. Darius sat at her bedside without speaking for a long time. He held her hand. He stared at the tile floor. He was a man sitting inside the full count of every way he had failed the person who built him, and finding no bottom to it. Eventually, he stood. He walked down the hospital corridor to where Kezia Monroe sat in a plastic chair outside the room, with Omari asleep and heavy across her lap. Darius stood in front of them. He looked at the boy. At the small sleeping face. At the hands that had carried food through a locked hall every day because they saw something that needed to be done and did it. Then Darius Whitmore lowered himself to one knee. He looked at Omari. Then at Kezia. He could barely hold the words together, but he did. He asked the boy one question. A quiet question. The kind a man asks when he has stripped away everything that protected him from the truth and there is nothing left but the truth itself. Omari stirred. Opened his eyes. And the boy's answer broke him. Why did you keep going back? That was the question. And Omari, still half asleep, cheek pressed against his mother's arm, eyes barely open, answered the way only a 3-year-old answers. Without hesitation. Without calculation. Without any awareness of the weight he had been carrying. Because she was hungry, he said. That was all. Darius covered his face with his hand and stayed on that knee for a long time. Celestine Whitmore recovered slowly. Weeks in the hospital. Months of careful rehabilitation. But she came back, not entirely the way she had been before the stroke, but enough. Enough to sit in direct sunlight by an open window. Enough to recognize her son when he entered a room. Enough to hold a small boy in her lap and let him talk to her in long, spinning circles about everything and nothing, the way he always had. Talia Beaumont was charged with elder abuse, criminal restraint, and negligence causing serious bodily harm. The trial lasted 19 days. She was convicted on every count. Darius rebuilt. Not the kind of rebuilding that makes headlines, the other kind. The interior kind that takes place in the quiet hours when no audience is present. He restructured his mother's care completely. He hired nurses he vetted himself and checked on without announcement. He showed up. That was the whole of it. He simply showed up. Kezia Monroe was no longer a maid. Darius arranged legal support. Citizenship documentation moved forward. Kezia was offered a permanent role as estate coordinator, not invisible anymore. Not working in the margins of someone else's life. Seen. Omari grew up the way children grow when they are shown that what they do matters. He started school. He made friends without difficulty, because he was the kind of child who noticed the one sitting alone and crossed the room to sit beside them without being asked. Years later, someone brought him back to the Whitmore estate. He was older now, old enough to understand what that locked room had been. He stood in the doorway of the west wing and looked inside. The room had been emptied. Repainted. Filled with plants and afternoon light. He stood there for a moment. Then he turned and walked back toward the sound of his mother's voice coming from the kitchen and the smell of something warm on the stove and the light that came through every window now because there was no reason left to keep anything closed. And the world finally understood. Kindness does not need strength. It only needs courage. If this story reached something inside you, do not keep that to yourself. Share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Subscribe to this channel and turn on your notifications, because we bring you stories like this one every single week. Stories about ordinary people who do extraordinary things when no one is watching. Stories that remind you what humanity looks like when it still works. Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Tell us which moment hit you the hardest. And if you know someone who needs a reminder that one small act of courage can change everything, send this to them right now. We will see you in the next one.